tonight, follow a soft silver road to a little inn hidden at the crossing of ages. An old, gentle witch stirs a pot of warm soup by the fire, while the quiet ghosts of forgotten kings and queens sit in armchairs, listening and remembering kingdoms that no longer exist in any book. Let the glow of the hearth, the whisper of moonlight, and the soft murmur of their stories slow your breathing, calm your thoughts, and carry you gently toward deep, peaceful sleep. The inn stood at a place where no road should have been, and yet it had always been waiting there, quiet and patient, like a stone at the bottom of a clear stream. By day, its walls looked almost ordinary, built from pale, weathered wood and dark beams that remembered older forests. At night, however, when the moon rose slow and silver over the low hills, the little house revealed its true shape. Lantern light spilled gently from its windows, soft as breath, and the air around it seemed to thicken with starlight, as if the sky had drawn closer to listen. The inn was small, but it carried a feeling of endlessness inside, like a deep, calm lake hidden behind a narrow shore. The witch who kept it was not the kind of witch found in fearful stories. She was old, yes, but old in the way of mountains and rivers, with a softness that comes from having watched many seasons turn. Her hair fell in long, silvery waves down her back, streaked with threads of pale moonlight and the quiet gray of early dawn. Her eyes were dark and gentle, carrying the soft, patient glow of embers that never fully die in a hearth. Her name had once been spoken in a language no one used anymore, and the sound of it had faded like mist at noon. But the inn knew her, and the wind knew her, and that was enough. She had built the inn at the crossing of ages, where time did not run straight like a river, but curved and folded like a drifting ribbon. Here, centuries brushed against each other like leaves in a soft breeze. Here, forgotten days touched the edges of nights that had never been written down. No living traveler could find this path by will alone. It lay between moments, in the quiet spaces where memory grows thin and the world dreams of itself. Yet the witch knew that certain souls, wandering and weary, would be able to reach it when their longing for rest became stronger than the pull of history. On the first evening, when her work was finally complete, she stood outside the door and looked up at the sky. The last light of the sun had faded into a gentle violet, and the first stars trembled awake like shy eyes. A soft wind moved across the grass, carrying the scent of distant rain and night flowers just beginning to open. The witch drew her shawl snug around her thin shoulders. She felt the quiet between her ribs, a peaceful emptiness ready to be filled with slow voices and softened stories. Inside, the inn was simple but warm. A wide stone hearth sat at the heart of the main room, its stones worn smooth and familiar, though no fire had yet been lit in this new place. Wooden tables and chairs waited patiently, their surfaces bearing the faint rings and scratches of lives that had not quite happened. A narrow staircase led to small rooms above, where beds were already made with linen sheets that smelled faintly of lavender and dried herbs. On the windowsills, Clay pots held soil from many forgotten lands, ready to welcome seeds of memories. The witch moved through these spaces with a slow, quiet grace, speaking to each piece of furniture as if to an old friend, smoothing a wrinkle here, adjusting a chair there, listening for the peaceful hum that told her everything was in its right place. She set a black iron pot over the empty hearth and filled it with clear water drawn from a well no map could show. The water glittered softly as it poured, catching little sparks of moonlight from the window. She added sliced root vegetables, dried mushrooms, leaves of soft green herbs, and a pinch of salt that had been carried by waves long forgotten. The scent that rose from the pot was gentle and comforting, like a memory of home from a life one might have lived. With a small nod, she lifted her hand and whispered a word that flowed like a quiet stream. Flames bloomed under the pot, not harsh or biting, but calm and steady, their light golden and soft. The hearth awakened, and the inn took its first warm breath. As the soup simmered, the witch moved to the door and opened it wide. Night air flowed in, cool and fragrant, bringing the touch of dew and the distant rustle of leaves. The path outside shimmered faintly, as if made of overlapping seasons instead of stone. Somewhere, far beyond sight, a river whispered its slow song, and the wind lifted it up, carrying it across the hills like a lullaby. She stood there for a long moment, listening, her hand resting lightly on the doorframe. The world felt very large and very quiet, yet not empty. There was a sense of presence, delicate, almost shy, the way dawn waits behind the horizon. She lit a lantern and set it on a hook just outside. Its glass sides were clouded with patterns that looked like tiny constellations, and when the flame inside began to glow, the light spilled out in small, silver gold shapes, as if pieces of starry sky had been caught and tamed. The lantern's glow fell upon the threshold, outlining the doorway in a gentle, welcoming halo. To anyone passing through the normal flow of time, the inn would remain invisible, no more real than a dream. But to those wandering in the soft shadows of forgotten years, the lantern would appear like a quiet star at the edge of their vision, beckoning them closer with silent warmth. Satisfied, the witch returned to her hearth. She stirred the soup slowly, watching the steam rise in delicate curls. Each curl seemed to paint shapes in the air: a crown, a crumbling tower, a long, winding road under a pale moon. She knew, with a certainty that did not need proof, that only certain spirits would be able to smell this soup, thick with herbs and the calm of still water. Only those whose names had fallen from the tongues of storytellers, whose faces had faded from the walls of great halls, would feel this gentle pull. The inn, the soup, the lantern, and the soft night together, they formed a kind of quiet call, a song without words, reaching into the spaces where forgotten kings and queens drifted like lost leaves in a wide, dark river. She walked to the small window facing the hills and opened it just a little. The night moved inside, bringing a breath of cool air that brushed her cheek like a soft hand. Beyond the inn, grasses swayed in the faint silver glow of the moon, their tips sparkling with early dew. Tiny night insects hummed, gentle and distant, weaving a thin, peaceful music through the air. In the shadowed distance, a line of pale mist lay along the ground like a sleeping river of cloud. To most eyes, it would have been nothing more than fog, but the witch knew better. She saw the faint outlines of shapes within it, crowns bent low, cloaks moving softly, footsteps that did not quite touch the earth. She smiled, a small, warm smile that deepened the fine lines around her eyes. "They are wandering," she murmured, her voice soft and slow, like the turning of pages in an old, beloved book. "They are wandering, and they are tired. The night is long for those who have been forgotten." She placed her hands on the windowsill and closed her eyes for a moment. In her mind, she saw distant palaces once lit by torches and candles, now swallowed by dust and moss. She saw banners that had once fluttered in bright colors, now faded into the memories of stone. She felt the quiet ache of those who had ruled worlds that no one remembered, who had loved and lost, and now drifted in shadowed, silent time. But within that ache, she also felt something else, a gentle longing, not for glory, but for rest. A longing for a chair by a fire, for a bowl of hot soup, for the simple kindness of being listened to. This inn, small and soft and warm, had been built for that longing alone. It was not a palace, not a throne room, not a place of power. It was a place of peace, of quiet, of soft lights and slow words, a place where the heavy robes of history could be set aside and folded neatly over the back of a chair. The witch moved back to the hearth and tasted the soup. It was rich and simple, carrying the sweetness of root and earth and a faint, comforting bitterness from the herbs. It tasted like rain on old stone, like bread broken between friends, like the calm that comes after tears. She ladled some into a wide wooden bowl and placed it on the table nearest to the fire, though no one sat there yet. Beside it, she set a cup of clear water, cool as moonlit springs, and a piece of soft bread. The place was ready. The inn was ready. She sat down in a chair by the hearth, her hands folded loosely in her lap, her gaze resting on the door. The fire crackled softly, sending little showers of sparks up the chimney, where they vanished into the dark like tiny, eager stars. Shadows moved gently along the walls, not threatening, only swaying with the slow breath of the flames. The witch let her thoughts drift, not into the past, not into the future, but into the gentle, silver present. She listened to the wind brushing against the eaves, to the quiet song of the simmering pot, to the soft, steady thump of her own heart. Time here was not sharp. It was smooth and deep, like polished river stones. After a while, she felt it, a change in the air, subtle and soft, like the first drop of rain touching dry earth. The lantern outside flickered, not with fear, but with recognition. The mist along the distant ground seemed to fold in upon itself, drawing nearer, gathering shape. Somewhere beyond the door, footsteps that made no sound approached along the path that was not a path. The witch did not rush. She only straightened her shawl, smoothed her dress, and let out a slow, peaceful breath. "There," she whispered, voice gentle as falling petals. "The first one has found the way." She turned her head toward the door, where the light from the lantern shone in a soft, golden line across the floor. The fire murmured. The soup sent up another lazy curl of fragrant steam. Outside, under the quiet moon, history shifted ever so slightly, making room at its edges, and at the crossing of ages, the inn waited, calm and ready, as the handle on the door began to move with the lightest, most delicate touch. The door opened as gently as a breath, as if the night itself were easing it inward. A soft drift of cold air slipped into the warm room, carrying with it a faint, shimmering scent of pine and distant frost. For a moment, the witch saw nothing but a pale mist curling in the doorway, silver in the lantern light, quiet and still. Then, slowly, the mist settled and shaped itself into a figure. A woman standing just beyond the threshold, her outline delicate, her presence both fragile and regal. She did not knock. She simply stood there, as though surprised to have found the door at last. Her hair was the first thing the witch noticed. It fell in long, straight strands over her shoulders and down her back, every strand white as new snow, but not the flat white of chalk or paper. It was the soft white of a winter morning sky, with a hint of blue and silver, as if starlight had melted and frozen again in a single breath. Tiny flakes of snow rested in her hair, drifting gently as she moved, yet never melting, never changing. They shone with a soft, quiet glow, like pieces of moonlight caught in a frozen web. Around her head, where a crown might once have rested, a thin circlet of frost glimmered, delicate as crystal, almost transparent, catching the light from the hearth in small flashes of silver. Her face was calm and pale, the color of frost-touched petals, but there was no harshness in it. Her features were fine and gentle, shaped by years of watching the world through falling snow. Her eyes were a soft, deep gray, like a winter sky just before dawn, full of quiet and distance and unshed memory. She wore a cloak of pure white, edged in a faint blue sheen, as if it had been woven from thin layers of ice and the breath of clouds. Beneath the cloak, her gown flowed like a slow, silent snowfall, each fold soft and graceful, moving with a quiet whisper when she stepped into the room. The witch rose from her chair without haste, her movements as calm as the slow turning of the seasons. She did not bow as subjects once bowed to their rulers, nor did she pretend not to see the shimmer of royalty around this gentle ghost. Instead, she inclined her head in a simple, warm welcome, her dark eyes kind and steady. "You have found the inn," she said softly, her voice like a low flame, comforting and steady. "Please, come in. The night is cold out there, and the soup is warm in here." The queen hesitated on the threshold, looking down at the floor just inside the door. For a brief moment, Her form flickered, as if the wind outside were trying to draw her back into the drifting mists of forgotten snow. Then she stepped forward, one foot after the other, and crossed into the room. As she did, the air around her shimmered with the faint crunch of footsteps on invisible snow, and tiny flakes fell from her cloak, dissolving in midair like small, silver dreams. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and the inn seemed to sigh, pleased to have its first guest safely inside. The warmth from the hearth touched her at once, but it did not melt her. It simply softened the sharpness of the cold around her, like gentle hands warming fingers that have been too long in the frost. She lifted her gaze and looked around the room, taking in the wooden beams, the simple tables, the chairs, the flickering firelight reflecting on the stone. Her eyes paused on the bowl of soup waiting at the nearest table, steam rising in soft curls that twisted and danced in the golden glow. Something in her expression loosened, a small, almost invisible easing of the lines at the corners of her eyes. "I did not think," she said quietly, her voice carrying the faintest echo, like sound moving through snow-covered forests, "that there would be a place like this. Not for those like me." The witch gestured gently toward the chair by the prepared bowl. "Sit," she replied. "Here, you are not those like you. You are simply someone who has walked far and is tired. Sit by the fire. Let the warmth be gentle to you. Let the quiet be your cloak for a while." The queen moved toward the table, each step slow and graceful, as if she were still walking through drifts of snow unseen by living eyes. She lowered herself into the chair with a kind of careful dignity, not the stiff posture of ceremony, but the measured calm of someone who has carried weight for a very long time and is learning to set it down. The fire painted her face with a soft golden light that mingled with the pale silver of her own glow, creating a peaceful, dreamlike halo around her. The witch sat down opposite her, close enough to offer comfort, distant enough to offer respect. For a moment, the queen simply watched the steam curling up from the bowl, as though unsure whether she was permitted to touch this simple human comfort. The witch gave her an encouraging nod, and at last the queen lifted the spoon. Her hand was slender and faintly translucent, yet steady. She tasted the soup slowly, her lips barely parting, as if each sip were something sacred. The warmth moved through her, gentle and soft, filling the hollow places where cold memory had rested for so long. A hint of color brushed her cheeks, like a faint rose tint on snow when the sun is very low and very kind. "It has been so long," she said at last, her voice slow and even, each word drifting into the air like a snowflake, "since anything has been warm." She looked up at the witch, and in her gray eyes there was not anger, not bitterness, but a quiet, astonished sorrow. "So long since I was more than a shadow in white forests, no one walks anymore." The witch folded her hands on the table, her fingers relaxed, her posture easy. "This is a place for shadows to rest," she answered softly, "for names that have fallen from the pages, for crowns that have turned to quiet frost. Here, you are welcome to remember or not to remember, You may speak, or you may sit in silence. The fire will burn for you either way." The queen set the spoon down for a moment and glanced toward the window. Through the small glass panes, she could see the night dark and deep outside. The sky a soft velvet blue scattered with stars. A single thin branch from the nearest tree traced a delicate pattern against the moon, like ink on paper. "My kingdom," she began slowly, "was a place where winter did not end quickly. The snow came in early whispers, light and soft, and then stayed, month after month, wrapping the hills and forests in quiet silver. At night, the aurora would come, dancing in gentle curtains of green and blue and pale purple, moving so softly across the sky that it felt like the world was dreaming, her eyes unfocused slightly, not in distress, but in the calm reach of memory. We had long nights," she continued, "but they were not cruel. We lit lanterns in our windows, so the light of one house would answer the light of another. All across the valley, the rivers froze, but they froze clear, and we could see the silver fish sleeping beneath the ice, drifting in their own cold dreams. The people wrapped themselves in wool and fur, and laughter steamed in the air. It was a quiet, cold, peaceful world, forgotten now, not even a footnote, just a space where no map is drawn." The witch listened without interruption, her gaze gentle and steady. Each word from the queen seemed to settle over the room like a fine layer of frost, not harsh, but delicate. The air became filled with silent images. Forests dressed in white, roofs edged in icicles, children's footprints in fresh snow, and the soft, distant song of bells calling across frozen fields. The fire in the hearth did not fight these memories. It simply warmed them, turning their sharpness into something round and soft, like a snowflake melting in a cupped hand. "And you?" the witch asked quietly, when the queen's voice fell to a hush. "What place did you hold in that gentle winter?" The queen's lips curved in the faintest of smiles, tinged with a deep, restful melancholy. "I was their queen," she said, "crowned with frost on a night when the aurora flowed over the sky like a river of light. They called me the Snow Lantern Queen because I made sure that in the darkest months, no window was left without a candle. I knew every house in the valley by the way its light flickered in the wind. I knew every child by the sound of their laughter on the ice. I was not a queen of battles. I was a queen of blankets and bread, of warm milk and quiet songs." She lifted the spoon again and took another sip. Her form brightened slightly with the warmth, though she remained ghostly, a soft outline of light and snow. "But the world turned," she said gently. "The snow melted, new lands were drawn, new stories were told, and the lanterns in my valley went out one by one, their smoke carried away by a wind no one noticed. The names of my people fell silent, and my own name sank below the surface of time. I wandered. I watched other winters in other lands, and they did not know me. I was only a drift of snow at the edge of their roads." The witch reached out and, very carefully, laid her hand near the queen's on the table, not touching, but close enough that a shared warmth seemed to pass between them. And yet, she said in a low, soothing voice, "You have found your way here. Your lanterns may have gone out there, but there is light for you here. Your valley may no longer be on any map, but your story can rest in this room, by this fire, as long as you need it to. You do not have to wander the snow alone anymore." The queen looked at her, and something soft and peaceful moved through her features. The endless, pale distance in her eyes drew closer, like a horizon coming within reach. "Is it enough," she asked, "to be remembered in just one small inn at the crossing of ages, by one witch and a single fire?" The witch smiled, a slow, gentle smile that seemed to reflect both moonlight and embers. "Sometimes," she replied, "one quiet room and one listening heart are more than any throne hall full of noise. Here you are seen. Here your winter is safe. That is a kind of memory deeper than ink." The queen's shoulders relaxed, the white cloak settling around her like a soft snowfall. For the first time, she leaned back in the chair, allowing her weight light though it was to rest. The flakes in her hair glowed a little brighter, catching the firelight and the moonlight together, turning them into a soft silver halo. Outside, the wind moved gently around the inn, the grasses whispering, the stars watching in their quiet way. Inside, the two women sat together, the witch and the snow lantern queen, and the night stretched long and peaceful around them, like a calm winter sky. The queen finished her soup slowly, savoring each warm, steadying mouthful. When the bowl was empty, she placed the spoon down with a small, contented sigh, a sound like snow settling onto a roof. "Thank you," she murmured, and the words were simple, but they carried the weight of centuries of wandering. The witch inclined her head once more. "Rest now," she said. "There is a room upstairs, with a window that looks out onto a field of stars. The bed is soft, and the night will be kind. You may dream of your valley, if you wish, or you may dream of nothing at all, only gentle, silver, quiet." The queen rose, her movements lighter now, as though the invisible snow around her had grown less deep. She followed the witch to the stairs, and for a moment she paused, looking back at the hearth, at the small, peaceful room, at the lantern's glow at the door. A slow smile touched her lips, and then she turned and climbed, each step a soft note in the house's new music. The witch watched until she disappeared into the shadows above, then returned to the fire, where the pot still simmered, patient and warm. Outside, the night deepened, but it did not grow harsh. The inn stood quiet and steady at the crossing of ages, its windows glowing like lanterns in a long winter. In one small room, a forgotten queen lay down on a bed she did not sink into, yet somehow felt, and closed her eyes. Snow fell softly in her dreams, not cold, not heavy, but gentle, peaceful, silver, and quiet. And downstairs, by the fire, the witch waited, knowing that more footsteps would find the path, and that the inn's warm light would be there, ready to welcome them home. Dawn and morning passed in their own slow, silver way, and the inn moved gently through the quiet hours. The witch rose before the pale light had fully touched the hills, and for a time she walked alone through the small rooms, making sure each corner felt peaceful, each surface calm beneath her fingertips. Upstairs, the Snow Lantern Queen rested without weight upon her bed, drifting in deep winter dreams where lanterns shone softly over white fields. The witch did not disturb her. She only paused at the door, listening with a subtle sense that had nothing to do with ears, and smiled to herself when she felt how still and settled the queen's presence had become. Then she descended again to the main room, where the hearth waited with cool stones, ready for the return of gentle flame. Outside, the world brightened and dimmed and brightened again. A soft rain passed in the late morning, washing the windows with silver streaks and leaving tiny shining beads on the grasses. By afternoon, a mild, wandering breeze moved across the crossing of ages, carrying a scent that was not only of rain, but of something older and deeper. The memory of flowing water, of riverbanks thick with reeds, of lanterns floating on slow currents like patient stars. The witch lifted her head as she stood over the hearth, feeling the change in the air. It was as if the inn itself had drawn a long, quiet breath of river mist. She set another pot over the fire, this time adding not only roots and herbs, but thin slices of wild onion and a handful of dried greens that smelled faintly of distant shorelines. Into the water she dropped a single smooth stone, pale and oval, taken long ago from a riverbed no map remembered. As the soup began to heat, a low, comforting sound rose with the simmering, like tiny ripples kissing the side of a wooden boat. The witch stirred slowly, her wooden spoon moving in gentle circles, and listened as the soft, imagined water song joined the crackling warmth of the new flames. By evening, the sky outside had deepened into a rich, velvety blue. A thin, silver moon hung low over the horizon, reflected in every raindrop still clinging to leaf and grass. Stars appeared, shy at first, then more boldly, opening like delicate flowers in a dark, tranquil garden. The air cooled, but not sharply. It was the kind of cool that feels like a smooth hand resting on a warm brow. The witch lit the lantern at the door again, and its golden light mingled with the faint, silvery glow of the rising moon. Within the inn, the scent of the soup thickened into something both nourishing and soothing. It carried hints of earth and river, of green banks and soft mud, of evenings on water when the world is very quiet and very gentle. She placed a wide wooden bowl on the table nearest the hearth, as she had done before, and filled it with the steaming soup. Beside it, she set a cup of clear water, which caught the firelight in soft gleams, and a piece of bread that still held the faint warmth of the oven. As she did so, she felt again that subtle shift in the air, a slight coolness, a faint, silken dampness, the way the atmosphere changes beside a wide, slow river at night. Her eyes turned to the door, and her heart, though old and steady, lifted in a quiet, welcoming anticipation. The latch moved, gently at first, then more firmly, as if someone unfamiliar with doors had remembered how they worked after a long time away from human rooms. When it opened, no cold wind rushed in this time. Instead, a soft, moist breeze slipped across the threshold, carrying the tender fragrance of water, reeds, and far-off rain. The lantern outside flickered, its light reflected in something that sparkled just beyond the doorway. There, standing in the frame, as though he had stepped out of a deep, starlit pool, was a man robed in shadows and shine. He was tall, though not in a way that demanded attention. His height was like that of old trees along a riverbank, steady and familiar. His hair, dark as the night sky, was wet and clung in gentle waves around his face and neck, pearl-like droplets tracing delicate paths down his temples and jaw. His cloak, long and flowing, seemed woven from layers of water and mist. It dripped onto the wooden floor in slow, luminous drops that glimmered like tiny stars before sinking silently into the boards, as though they were returning to a remembered bed of stone. His hands, strong yet relaxed at his sides, glowed faintly where the liquid light touched them, as if he carried within him the last reflections of a vanished river. His face was calm, with a noble stillness that did not need a throne to reveal its origin. Lines of age and care traced themselves gently around his mouth and eyes, but they were soft lines, worn by worry for others rather than by hard ambition. His eyes, dark and deep, held a steady, peaceful gaze, like the surface of a river just after sunset, when the day's last colors are sinking into the water. Around his brow, not solid and heavy like many crowns, but delicate and shifting, there shimmered a band of faint light, as if made from moonbeams glancing off gentle waves. It was not entirely there, not entirely gone. A crown remembered more by the water than by the world. The witch rose from her chair by the fire and inclined her head in welcome. The same simple, warm gesture she had offered the Queen of Snow. "You have walked far," she said softly. "Or perhaps you have drifted far. Either way, you are at the inn now, at the crossing of ages. Come in, and let the night be soft to you." The man stepped forward, and as he crossed the threshold, the sound of his bare feet on the wood was not quite a footstep, but more like the quiet lap of water against a gentle shore. The air inside the inn shifted, becoming cooler in a peaceful way, as if the room had moved closer to a riverbank under stars. He looked around, taking in the hearth, the tables, the lantern glow, the hanging herbs, the polished beams. Then his gaze settled on the prepared bowl of soup, the drifting steam making small, twisting paths upward through the lamplight. His expression softened, and a hint of light kindled more brightly in his eyes, like a star emerging from behind a thin veil of cloud. "It smells," he said slowly, his voice low and calm, with a faint echo of water flowing over stones, like evenings by the river when my people gathered on the banks and sang to the lanterns. "Then I have chosen well," the witch replied, and her lips curved in a gentle smile. She gestured toward the chair. "Sit by the fire, King of Water. Let the warmth and the soup remember you kindly." At her words, he paused, as if surprised to hear his forgotten title spoken aloud. "King of Water," he repeated, and the words seemed to stir something deep within him. "It has been so long since anyone called me that. The river is gone. The maps do not remember its name, nor mine." His tone held no bitterness, only a mild, wistful quiet, like the calm that comes after a long rain has passed. "Names have many places to rest," the witch said gently. "Maps are only one. Here, a name can rest in the glow of the fire, in the steam of the pot, in the sound of your voice as you tell your story. Sit and let your river run again for a little while, softly, in words and in warmth." He moved to the chair and settled into it with a slow, graceful motion, as though he were lowering himself into a boat that rocked on an invisible current. The wet edges of his cloak did not leave puddles. Instead, they faded into the air, filling the room with a faint shimmer, as if the very space around him had become a quiet reflection. He took the spoon in his hand, and when he lifted it, the soup within it caught the light with a soft gleam, as though a tiny fragment of moonlit water had been cradled in the curve of the metal. He tasted it, eyes closing for a brief, gentle moment. The flavors spread through him: earthy roots, soft greens, a hint of something that reminded him of river mist on fresh bread. The warmth moved into the hollow places left by his lost river, settling there in slow, peaceful waves. When he opened his eyes again, they shone more clearly, and his shoulders relaxed with a quiet, unhurried exhale. "My kingdom," he began, his gaze wandering toward the window, where the moon's pale light lay in a silver stripe on the sill, was built along a single, patient river. We did not stretch far across the land or climb high into the mountains. We flowed. Villages and towns curved along the river's path like beads on a gentle string. At night, we set small lanterns on the water, hundreds of them, then thousands, each one carrying a wish, a blessing, a memory. To stand on the bank and watch them drift was to see our hopes shining like little moons. His fingers, long and steady, traced an absent shape on the table, as if drawing the course of that river from memory. Our boats moved slowly, he continued, not hurried, never impatient. Fishermen hummed soft songs to the water. Children leaned over the sides, trailing their hands in the cool flow and laughing when silver fish brushed their fingers. My palace was not a tall fortress on a hill, but a broad, low hall with pillars carved like reeds, standing close enough to the river that I could hear it at all hours. At night, I slept to its murmur, soft and endless, like a friendly voice always speaking, never demanding. The witch listened in silence, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight and the faint water glow that clung to him. As he spoke, the inn responded. The crackle of the fire softened, its rhythm taking on the slow, steady pattern of water against stone. The shadows on the walls shifted gently, no longer only the shapes of beams and chairs, but now the pale suggestion of boats, reeds, and long, wavering reflections. Even the air seemed to carry a faint, fresh coolness, like the breath of a river in summer. The inn, at the crossing of ages, was learning his kingdom, holding it with the same care the witch offered. How did it vanish? The witch asked quietly, her voice carrying no sharpness, only a calm curiosity, as gentle as a ripple. Did the river dry, or did the memory? The man smiled with a deep, serene sadness, not painful now, only tender. Both, he said. The river shifted slowly over years, then decades. It found new paths under the earth, new ways to exist elsewhere. Our people followed, but the world beyond us was louder than our songs. New cities grew far from the water. New rivers were named. Our lanterns floated fewer and fewer each year, until one night there were none. The last of our boats were pulled ashore and left there, where the grass grew through them. He dipped his spoon again and took another sip, letting the warmth and the taste anchor him in the present, in this room, in this gentle now. I walked along the dry bed one evening, he said, and the stones that had once been washed smooth and shining were dull under the dust. I felt the world turn away, not cruelly, simply turning. People forgot the way our lanterns had looked. They forgot the songs we sang, and so I wandered, following the hidden paths of water under the earth, listening for the sound of my river in other streams. Time passed, and I became a soft echo, a quiet presence, a king with no current to follow. The witch leaned forward just a little, her hands resting lightly on the table, palms open as if to offer a place for his words to rest. Your river is not gone, she said softly. Here, it still flows, in your memory, in your voice, in the way the air changes when you step inside this inn. The world may have turned away, but this room turns toward you. This hearth listens. This soup remembers. The river of your kingdom has become a river of story, and it can be as gentle and peaceful as it ever was if you let it flow tonight. He looked at her, and in his dark eyes there was gratitude, clear and steady. You make a small place feel as deep as an ocean, he murmured. You make a single bowl of soup feel like a feast on the banks of my river. The witch shook her head with a quiet smile. I only tend the fire, she replied. You bring the river with you. It is you who make this room larger. It is you who let the water return, softly, without needing maps or stone bridges. For a while longer, they sat together without speaking. The fire whispered. The imagined river hummed in the walls. Somewhere above, the snow lantern queen slept, perhaps now hearing in her dreams the distant music of water flowing beneath frozen fields. The stars outside shone in the puddles of last night's rain, which now, under the presence of the king, looked more like tiny pools of dark, shimmering glass. The night was full, but it was not noisy. It was full in a quiet, peaceful, silver way. When the bowl was empty, the king of the vanished river placed his spoon gently on the table. The light around him had softened even further, as though the bright reflections of long ago waters had settled into a calm, steady glow. "Thank you," he said, his voice as smooth and slow as the river he remembered, "for giving my current somewhere to rest." The witch rose and nodded toward the stairs. "There is a room waiting for you," she told him, "with a small window that faces the place where the mist gathers. If you listen closely, you may hear your river there, not as it was, but as it wishes to be now, gentle, soft, peaceful, a river of dreams instead of water." He stood, his cloak flowing quietly around him, leaving no trace of dampness now, only the faint impression of coolness, like a memory of standing in shallow water. At the foot of the stairs, he paused and looked back, his gaze lingering on the hearth, the lantern, the witch. If anyone should ever dream of a river they do not know, he said softly, "a river with lanterns like little moons, will that be enough? Will that mean we are not entirely gone?" The witch's eyes shone warm in the firelight. "Yes," she answered. "A single dream can hold an entire kingdom. Here, and in the hearts of those who listen, your river will always find a way to flow." With that, the king of the vanished river climbed the stairs, each step gentle, each movement calm. The inn seemed to wrap itself around him, offering its quiet as a kind of shoreline. When he disappeared into the darkness above, the witch returned to her chair by the hearth. She stirred the pot one last time, listening to the soft, soothing sounds of fire and imagined water mingling together. Outside, the night deepened, and the moon's reflection rested in every small puddle like a tiny silver ship. Within the inn, at the crossing of ages, the stories of snow and water now slept under the same roof, peaceful and at rest, while the witch kept watch in the soft glow of the fire, waiting with gentle patience for the next forgotten crown to find its way home. Night deepened around the inn in a gentle, unhurried way, like ink slowly sinking into soft paper. Upstairs, the snow lantern queen and the king of the vanished river rested in their quiet rooms, wrapped not in blankets, but in the peaceful weightlessness of sleep that belongs only to those who have walked a very long road. The house held their dreams like cupped hands, careful and tender, its beams and walls humming with a new, soft music woven from snowlight and water song. Downstairs, the fire in the hearth had grown low, its flames no longer leaping, only sighing, glowing in a deep, steady bed of embers. The witch watched it for a time, letting her thoughts drift, feeling the calm seep into her bones like warm tea. At last, she rose from her chair, slow and unhurried, and moved toward the back door of the inn. Her steps made almost no sound on the wooden floor, as though she were as weightless as the guests sleeping above. She opened the door and stepped out into the night garden, closing it gently behind her. The air outside was cool and soft, smelling of damp earth, distant rain, and the faint sweetness of night flowers unfolding their petals to the stars. The sky above was deep and dark and full, scattered with countless tiny lights that shimmered like seeds of silver scattered across velvet. A thin crescent moon floated low, its pale curve delicate as a smile remembered in quiet. The garden behind the inn was not large, but it felt wide, like a secret world. Narrow paths, edged with small stones, wound between patches of herbs and flowers. Some plants were familiar: lavender, chamomile, mint, releasing their gentle perfumes into the night. Others were stranger, their leaves tinted with faint blue or soft gold, their blossoms opening only to moonlight, glowing in hushed, silvery tones. Dew clung to every blade of grass and every petal, reflecting the stars in tiny, trembling mirrors. When the witch walked among them, the dewdrops shivered with her passing, as if greeting her in a quiet, crystalline chorus. She moved along the path until she reached the far corner of the garden, where an old tree stood with roots that had known many seasons. Its trunk was thick and gnarled, its bark rough and dark, but its branches spread in a gentle canopy over a small circle of ground. Like an old guardian shielding a secret, tiny flowers grew around its base, pale and star-shaped, their glow soft and steady. The tree's leaves whispered softly in the breeze, a kind, low rustle like sleepy voices asking no questions. The witch stopped beneath its branches and laid her hand lightly upon the bark, as if greeting an old friend. For a long moment, she simply stood there, listening. The wind murmured through the leaves. The distant chirp of night insects traced a fine thread of music around the beds of herbs. And somewhere not far away, a hidden trickle of water slipped over stones, so soft it was almost a thought instead of a sound. The inn behind her was a quiet, warm presence, its windows glowing faintly, its roof dark against the sky. Above, the stars watched in their patient way. All of it together formed a gentle, protective hush, a kind of soft shelter made from air and light and shadow. It was within this shelter that the witch allowed herself to reach for what she had hidden. At the base of the tree, where the roots curved and intertwined like sleeping serpents of wood, there was a hollow in the earth, concealed beneath a layer of moss and fallen leaves. She knelt slowly, feeling the cool dampness of the ground through the cloth of her dress, and brushed the moss aside with careful fingers. The soil beneath was dark and rich, smelling of rain and time. From within that darkness, she drew out a small, weathered wooden box, its lid marked with faint lines that might once have been carvings of waves or mountains or clouds. The wood was smooth with age, its edges rounded, as if many hands had held it in days the world no longer remembered. She sat back on her heels, the box resting on her knees, and for a while she did nothing more than run her fingertips along its surface. Her eyes were calm, but there was a deeper quiet in them now, a stillness that went far beneath the present moment, down into older layers of memory. The wind touched her hair, lifting a few silvery strands, letting them shine for a heartbeat in the moonlight before letting them fall again. Her face, lined and gentle, belonged to the witch everyone saw, the keeper of soup and fire and soft lanterns at the crossing of ages. But beneath that face, within the slow, steady beat of her heart, there was another life, another name, another crown. When she finally lifted the lid, she did it with a care that was almost ceremonial. Inside, nestled in a bed of faded cloth, lay a simple crown. It was not grand. No large gems burned in its circlet. No sharp points reached upward like grasping fingers. It was made of a pale, once bright metal, now tarnished into a soft dullness like moonlight dimmed by fog. The band was thin, shaped with delicate, flowing curves that suggested leaves, waves, and rising birds, though time had softened the details. In a few places, the metal was worn smooth, as if touched often by thoughtful hands. It had the quiet look of something that had once shone brightly under sun and torch, and now rested in the gentle half-light of memory. She looked at it for a long time, her dark eyes reflecting its faint, muted gleam. "You are not much to look at now," she said softly, her voice almost a breath, "meant more for the crown than for the night. And perhaps you never were, even then. But you were mine." She lifted the circlet from the box with slow, reverent care, and the metal felt cool and light in her hands, like a ring of still water drawn from a deep well. For a moment, the garden seemed to hold its breath. The wind quieted, the leaves stilled, even the faint trickle of hidden water seemed to pause, as if listening to what the old witch would remember. "I had a kingdom once," she murmured, and the words did not come in a rush, but in a slow, even current. It was not wide. It did not stretch across oceans or rise up into great mountains. It was a small kingdom, gentle and green, wrapped around a valley where the mornings were filled with mist and birdsong. We had a river that ran clear and quiet, fields that rolled out like soft blankets, and orchards where blossoms fell away in spring like pale snow. Our towers were not tall, but they were open to the sky, and moonlight slipped easily into our halls. She tilted the crown, watching the moonlight slide along its worn edges. "They called me queen," she continued, "because that was the word the world had for such a role. But I was not a queen of battles or decrees. I knew the names of the farmers, the pattern of the clouds, the sound of the wind in each grove of trees. I knew how the river sounded in summer, and how it changed when autumn rain made it swell. At night, I walked along the castle walls and watched the stars rise over the fields, and I thought that if I listened closely enough, I could hear the earth breathing, calm and slow." Her voice did not tremble. It flowed, calm and steady, like a story she had told herself many times in the privacy of her own heart. "In time," she said, "the maps changed. New names were written where ours had been, new lines drawn, new borders agreed upon. Our valley became a passage, then a footnote, then nothing at all. The songs my people sang slipped into the air and did not return. The towers sank beneath ivy and moss, and I, too, became a soft shape fading into the edges, a name worn thin by silence. My crown lost its shine, and I placed it in this box, beneath this tree, and I walked into the world as something else." She lowered the circlet into her lap and looked up at the sky. The stars above her seemed to draw a little closer, their light nestling among the leaves. "I chose," she said quietly, "to become a witch instead of a queen. Not the witch of fearful tales, but a watcher, a listener, a keeper of small flames in dark places. I learned the language of herbs and roots, the way water holds memories, the way wind carries whispers. I walked along the edges of ages and listened to all that had been forgotten. In time, I found this crossing place where the paths of lost kings and queens drift close to each other, and I built this inn so they would have somewhere gentle to rest. She looked back down at the crown, her expression soft, touched with neither pride nor regret, but with a kind of tender acceptance. I did not bring them here only for them, she admitted in a murmur that only the tree and the starlight could hear. I brought them here for myself as well, to know that I was not the only one whose valley, whose banners, whose songs had slipped quietly from the world's remembering. To know that forgetting is not a punishment, but a turning of the seasons. To know that we who have been set aside by history can still have warm soup and firelight, and someone who listens. She held the crown up, just for a breath, as if measuring its soft, tarnished circle against the curve of the moon seen through the branches. For an instant, something gentle passed through her features, like a wave of old emotion, sorrow perhaps, but softened by time into a quiet ache, and then into something easier, something almost like peace. She did not lift the crown to her head. She did not need to. She had worn it for many years, and then she had carried it in her heart for many more. To put it on now would not change who she had become. Instead, she lowered it back into the box, laying it carefully on the faded cloth. She rested her fingertips on the metal for a final moment, and in that touch was not farewell, but a blessing. Rest, she whispered to the crown, as she whispered to her guests, in the soft earth of memory. You were once bright. Now you may be quiet. You are not lost. You are simply at peace. Then she closed the lid and slid the box back into the hollow between the roots, covering it again with moss and leaves, returning it to the gentle cradle of the earth. When she rose to her feet, the garden exhaled with her, a slow, sweet breath of damp soil and blooming flowers. The wind resumed its soft song in the leaves. The hidden trickle of water began again, slipping over stones in a sleepy murmur. Above her, the stars seemed to shine more kindly, as if satisfied that this small piece of truth had been spoken into the open air. The witch stood for a few moments longer beneath the arching branches of the old tree, her face turned to the sky, letting the moonlight rest lightly on her brow where a crown once had. I am no longer queen, she said softly, to the night and to herself. I am the keeper of this inn. I am the listener of stories. I am the one who stirs the soup and lights the lanterns and opens the door when weary ghosts arrive. It is enough. It is gentle. It is mine. The night accepted her words without argument, wrapping them in cool, silver quiet. She turned and walked back along the stone-edged path, her steps easy, her shawl brushing softly against the leaves that leaned in as she passed. The inn awaited her, warm and steady, its windows glowing softly like small suns caught in wooden frames. She opened the door and stepped inside, bringing with her the scent of night flowers and dew. The fire, though low, still held a deep, comforting glow, and the pot over the hearth sighed quietly in its sleep. As she settled once more into her chair by the hearth, she felt not smaller, but somehow larger, as though by remembering her own forgotten crown, she had made more space inside herself for the stories of others. Upstairs, the Snow Lantern Queen and the King of the Vanished River slept on, their dreams cradled by the inn's listening walls. Outside, the stars kept watch over the garden and the old tree and the hidden box among its roots. And at the crossing of ages, the witch, once a queen, now a gentle guardian of forgotten royalty, closed her eyes for a moment and rested, wrapped in the peaceful, silver quiet of the night. The day that followed was a soft one, quiet and unhurried, as if time itself had grown drowsy within the shelter of the inn. Morning light drifted through the windows in pale ribbons, touching the wooden floor with a golden gentleness. The Snow Lantern Queen came down the stairs first, her step light as falling snow, her white hair glowing faintly in the morning light. Not long after, the King of the Vanished River followed, bringing with him a cool, fresh calm, as though he had stepped from the shade of a willow tree beside slow water. The witch greeted them both with warm bread and herbal tea that smelled of mint and wild honey, and they sat together in a simple, companionable silence that needed no explanation. They did not speak much that day, though here and there small threads of conversation wove themselves through the quiet. The queen spoke of the sound snow makes when it falls in deep forests, a soft, nearly wordless hush that feels like the whole world breathing in. The king told of lantern festivals along his river, when songs drifted over the water and reflections trembled slowly on the surface. The witch listened, her heart filled with a peaceful gladness at the way these once lost monarchs now shared their memories, not as laments, but as gentle offerings. The inn held their voices with care, storing each image and phrase like seeds in fertile soil. By late afternoon, the light outside began to change. The sky grew clearer, the blue deepening, the air carrying a faint, expectant stillness. The witch stepped out to the threshold and looked upward. High above, a few thin clouds stretched across the heavens like soft brushstrokes, their edges turning slowly to silver. The breeze that touched her face felt different, carrying not the sense of snow or river alone, but something brighter, almost festive, like a distant echo of laughter carried from another time. She knew with that quiet certainty that needed no proof that the night ahead would be special. When the sun finally slipped down behind the unseen hills, the sky did not rush into darkness. Instead, it passed through a long, delicate twilight, where the first stars appeared one by one, shy and gentle, as if they were guests themselves, unsure if they had arrived at the right house. The witch lit the lantern at the door as she always did, its golden flame breathing softly behind the patterned glass. Inside, she stoked the fire until it burned bright and steady, then set about preparing a meal more abundant than usual. She simmered a rich vegetable stew with grains from distant fields, baked loaves of fragrant bread, and sliced fruits that carried the sweetness of summer orchards into the cool evening air. On the wooden tables, she placed clay cups ready for warm, spiced tea, the rising steam carrying notes of cinnamon and orange peel. As she worked, something began to happen outside. At first, it was barely noticeable. A slight thickening of the darkness beyond the windows, as if the night were gathering itself. Then tiny points of light appeared in the air above the inn, not high like stars, but nearer, floating gently just above the roof, just above the garden, just above the path. The witch glanced out and allowed herself a small, knowing smile. They had come, the lantern stars. They moved in a slow, drifting dance, each light no larger than a cupped hand, glowing in soft shades of gold, amber, and pale rose. They did not burn like fire. They shimmered like memories, steady and tender. Some were round, some tear-shaped, some shaped like small flowers or moons. Each one carried within it a faint, pulsing gleam, like a heartbeat. These were not ordinary lanterns. They were the gentle remnants of celebrations that had slipped through the cracks of time. Lost coronations, overlooked weddings, quiet feasts held on the edges of forgotten kingdoms. They were the light left over when joy had gone unremembered. The witch opened the door wider and stood watching as the lantern stars drifted closer. They did not crowd or jostle. They floated with serene, peaceful grace, coming to rest above the inn in a loose, glowing constellation. Their golden light fell over the roof, the garden, and the doorway, mingling with the pale silver of the real stars above and the cool, soft shine of the crescent moon. From within the inn, the snow lantern queen and the king of the vanished river stepped out, drawn by the glow. They stood beside the witch on the threshold, their translucent forms catching the light in their own quiet ways. The queen's snowflakes sparkled like tiny crystals in her white hair, reflecting the lantern's gold in a delicate shimmer. The king's cloak, still carrying the memory of water, glowed faintly where the lights touched it, as if droplets of river had caught fireflies. For a moment, none of them spoke. They simply watched as the lanterns hovered and swayed, and more arrived, drifting from unseen distances. Some carried the soft echo of music within their glow. Others held the faintest scent of flowers or spices long vanished from living gardens and kitchens. It was as though the sky had lowered a second, gentler firmament down to the head of the inn. Soon, more figures began to appear along the path that was not quite a path. From the mist beyond the crossing, kings and queens emerged one by one, drawn by the warm light, the drifting lanterns, and the steady glow of the hearth inside. Some wore crowns of leaves, others small circlets of metal, others no visible crown at all, their royalty resting only in the quiet dignity of their features. Their garments whispered of lost fashions and faded colors. Their eyes carried distances and stories. But as they approached the inn, something in their shoulders relaxed. as if the weight of unseen years had grown lighter. The witch greeted each one with a gentle nod and a few soft words of welcome, calling none of them by title, yet honoring them all. She invited them inside, where the air was warm and scented with stew and bread and tea. The Snow Lantern Queen and the King of the Vanished River helped guide them to chairs and benches, their presence like calm anchors in the room. Soon, the common hall was filled with quiet figures, their forms glowing softly in the mingled light of fire and lantern stars. The inn, though not large, seemed to stretch to accommodate them all, every corner unfolding like a patient, welcoming hand. When all had arrived and settled, the witch moved among them, setting bowls of stew before each guest. The spoons passed from hand to hand, some firm, some faint and shimmering, but all capable of lifting warmth to lips that remembered hunger and comfort. No one hurried. Each mouthful was taken with reverence. Each sip of tea savored like a small blessing. The room filled with the gentle sounds of eating, the occasional sigh of relief, the soft brush of cloth against wood. Above them, through the windows, the lantern stars hovered, their light bending downward, as if they too were listening and resting. After a time, when hunger had eased and the warmth of food and drink had settled into ghostly bones and long-forgotten hearts, the witch raised her hand slightly. The room quieted, not because she demanded silence, but because the moment itself grew still and ready. "Tonight," she said in a calm, low voice that carried to every corner of the room, "the lantern stars have gathered. They are made from joy that no one remembered to keep, from gentle celebrations that slipped away unsung. Let us give them a home, just for this night. Let us speak not of sorrow, but of happiness. Let us share the soft, bright moments of your kingdoms, so they may float here like lanterns on peaceful water." There was a pause, a breath the whole room seemed to take together. Then, slowly, a queen with dark hair braided with tiny flowers lifted her eyes. "In my land," she began, her voice like the rustle of leaves in evening wind, "we had a festival of gardens every spring. Children would weave garlands and hang them on every door. We danced in circles until the stars came out, and the air smelled of blossom and fresh earth." As she spoke, one of the lantern stars drifted in through the open window, hovering just above her hands. Within its glow, a faint image appeared. Children running between rows of flowers, petals swirling around their ankles like bright, gentle snow. Another guest, a king with a cloak embroidered in faded patterns of suns, spoke next. "On the longest day of the year," he said softly, "we lit bonfires on the hills, not to ward off anything, but to greet the night when it finally came. We played music until the first stars appeared, and when they did, we lowered our voices and listened, as if the sky itself were singing back to us." Above him, a lantern star brightened, its interior flickering with tiny, dancing shadows that looked like silhouettes around a distant fire. One by one, the kings and queens shared their happiest recollections, each memory gentle and bright. They spoke of quiet coronations, where vows were whispered rather than shouted, of weddings where rivers and trees were invited as silent witnesses, of small feasts where only simple food was served, but every bite tasted like gratitude. As each story floated into the air, a lantern star would drift closer, glowing a little more warmly, as though it were drinking in the joy and keeping it safe. The room, already lit by fire and candle, grew soft with layers of golden light, each glow a tender echo of laughter that had once lived and now lived again. The Snow Lantern Queen, when her turn came, did not speak of the long winter or the fading of her valley. She spoke of a single night when the aurora had come in colors no one had words for, and her people had stood together in silence, hand in hand, watching the sky. The king of the vanished river told of an evening when a sudden summer rain had fallen on the lantern festival, and instead of fleeing, the people had danced in the water, their lanterns reflected in 1,000 moving ripples. The witch herself, at the gentle insistence of those around her, spoke of a harvest night in her own small kingdom long ago, when she had walked among her people with bare feet in the stubbled fields and felt, for a brief, shining moment, that the whole world was breathing in contentment. As the hours passed, no one spoke of battles or losses, or the ways their kingdoms had been forgotten. Instead, they gathered their happiest fragments, their softest, brightest moments, and let them rise like little suns into the shared air. The inn held all these stories together, weaving them into a quilt of warmth and light. Outside, the lantern stars above the roof glowed ever more peacefully, as if filled to the brim with gentle memories. The real stars looked on from higher up, distant but kind, their silver glimmer mingling with the gold below. Eventually, voices grew softer, then faded into comfortable silence. Some guests rested their heads on folded arms. Others leaned back in their chairs, eyes half closed, faces bathed in the warm glow. The witch moved quietly through the room, placing blankets over shoulders. Though most of her guests needed no physical warmth, it was a gesture, and gestures have a magic of their own. The Snow Lantern Queen and the King of the Vanished River remained nearby, keeping a silent watch, their presence steady as moonlight on snow and river. When the lanterns at last began to dim, it was not with the abruptness of extinguished flames, but with the gentle fading of dawn stars giving way to morning light. They drifted toward the windows and the open door, pausing as if in farewell, their inner images softening into pure, warm glow. Then, one by one, they rose into the night sky, joining the real stars in a slow, upward dance, until all that remained of them was a lingering sense of joy, like the aftertaste of sweet fruit, like the memory of music long after the last note has gone. Inside the inn, the fire burned low but steady. The kings and queens, wrapped in the peaceful hush that comes after shared happiness, made their way slowly back to their rooms, or, for those who had only just arrived this night, to the beds the inn had quietly prepared for them. The witch watched them go, her heart full and quiet, and when the last guest had climbed the stairs, she stood alone in the common room, looking up at the small square of sky visible through the window. The heavens were calm, sprinkled with silver stars. Somewhere among them, she imagined, the lantern stars had found their resting places, their gentle glows now part of the great, soft tapestry of the night. She whispered a few simple words of thanks, a blessing for the joys that had once been overlooked, a blessing for the soft, bright pieces of life that history forgets to write down. Then she banked the fire with slow, practiced hands and let the room sink into a deep, peaceful quiet. Beyond the walls, the night wrapped itself around the inn like a warm, dark cloak, gentle and protective. Within, in their separate rooms, forgotten kings and queens slept with faint smiles on their faces, their dreams illuminated by lanterns that would never again be lost. And at the crossing of ages, the witch stood for a final moment at the door, feeling the night air on her skin, feeling the silver calm of the stars, before closing it softly and letting the inn itself fall into its own kind of dream. Morning slipped over the inn like a soft shawl, quiet and pale. The sky brightened slowly, turning from deep blue to a gentle, washed-out silver as the sun rose somewhere beyond the veils of mist and time that wrapped the crossing of ages. Inside, the witch moved through the rooms with calm, familiar steps, opening shutters just enough to let in the cool air and the tender light. Kings and queens drifted down the stairs, one by one, more at ease than when they had first arrived, their forms clearer, their eyes softer. The memory of the lantern stars still clung to them like a warm glow, as if they had carried a little of that golden light into their own chests. The day passed in unhurried ease. Some guests sat by the windows, watching the way the wind combed through the grasses outside, its invisible fingers tracing slow, rippling patterns. Others spoke quietly in corners, exchanging stories not of rule and burden, but of simple moments, childhood games, favorite trees, the taste of fruits that no longer grew anywhere but in memory. The snow lantern queen and the king of the vanished river often shared the same table, their words flowing back and forth like snow and water meeting at the edge of thaw. The witch watched them all with a gentle, satisfied awareness, tending to cups and plates and the small, soothing tasks that gave shape to the day. It was in the late afternoon, when the light had turned mellow and golden and the air outside had grown very still, that the witch looked toward the back door and felt a familiar stirring. The garden was calling in its own subtle way, the way living things do when they are ready for attention. She knew the time had come to show her guests another secret, one that lived not in the common room or the hidden library, but under open sky and among petals that only truly bloomed at dusk. Her heart warmed at the thought, for the garden behind the inn was not only for her, it was for them, and for those who had never been. As evening began to gather, she lit a small lantern, not the one at the front door, but a simpler one with clear glass and a steady, modest flame. Its light was soft and warm, carrying no urgency, only invitation. She went to the common room, where her guests were beginning to settle into the comfortable quiet that arrived each night like a gentle friend. "If you wish," she said, her voice calm and low, but with a hint of anticipation glimmering beneath it. "Come with me to the garden. There is something there that belongs to all of you, though you may not know it yet." Curiosity moved through the room like a mild breeze. One by one, the kings and queens rose. The snow lantern queen gathered her frosted cloak around her, and the king of the vanished river straightened, his cloak shimmering with the faintest echo of hidden currents. Others joined them, a queen whose crown had once been woven from laurel leaves, a king whose robes carried the faded embroidery of distant suns, and several more whose names the world no longer spoke, yet whose presence was as natural as the turning of the sky. Together, they followed the witch through the inn and out the back door into the fading light. The garden greeted them with a hush. The last notes of day were fading from the horizon, and the first threads of twilight were weaving themselves into the air. The sky overhead was a soft, deepening blue, with a single bright star already awake, shining like a tiny, hopeful candle. The wind moved lightly through the leaves, carrying the cool sweetness of earth and the gentle perfume of blossoms just beginning to open. The lantern in the witch's hand threw a circle of warm light around their feet, but much of the garden remained in quiet shadow, waiting to reveal itself under the touch of night. They walked along the stone-edged path, and the guests looked around in wonder. Herbs they recognized sent out familiar scents, lavender calming the mind, mint clearing it, chamomile smoothing the breath. But beyond these, there were other plants whose leaves glowed faintly with their own inner light, whose blossoms shimmered with colors that were neither of day nor of ordinary night. Some flowers were shaped like stars, others like tiny cups or bells. Their petals rippled with hints of silver, pale blue, soft gold, and a kind of deep violet that seemed to gather starlight into itself. Dew already beaded along stems and leaves, turning every touch of light into a small, trembling jewel. "This," the witch said gently, stopping in the center of the garden where the paths crossed and the air seemed particularly still, "is the garden of unwritten kingdoms. It is where stories that almost were and lands that almost came to be are given a place to grow. These are not the kingdoms history forgot, but the ones it never quite had room to write at all the dreams of lands that lived only in the hearts of those who wished for them." Her guests looked around with a new kind of attention, the kind reserved for wonders that are both beautiful and mysterious, yet strangely soothing. She knelt and touched a low cluster of pale blossoms that glowed with a soft, pearly light. "This patch," she continued, "comes from the dream of a child who imagined a country where every river sang in two voices, one for fish and one for birds. No such place ever appeared on any map, and yet the dream was strong, and so it took root here. Over there," she nodded toward a slender tree with leaves like thin, silver coins that chimed softly when the wind brushed them, "grows the memory of a land a poet almost invented in a story they never finished. It does not exist, and yet it lives here, peacefully, softly, In this garden, the Snow Lantern Queen stepped closer to a group of flowers with petals as thin as ice, tinted with a faint green glow. The air around them felt cool and clear, like the breath of a winter morning. "They feel familiar," she murmured, reaching out with a hand that passed just above one bloom's surface, "as if they are related to my valley, though not quite the same." The witch smiled. "They are the might have been winters," she explained, "the ones that almost settled in lands far from yours, but did not. They came here instead and became blossoms. They do not freeze. They soothe. Their cold is gentle, a soft coolness meant only to calm the heat of tired thoughts." The king of the vanished river wandered towards a small pool at the garden's edge. The water there was clear and very still, reflecting the sky like a polished mirror. Around its border grew slender grasses tipped with tiny points of light. When he leaned over and looked into the surface, he saw not his own face alone, but shifting, nebulous shapes, a network of delicate streams and inlets, paths of water that might have been. "Are these rivers?" he asked softly. "Rivers that never found a source?" The witch came to stand beside him. "They are the rivers of unwritten lands," she replied, "the ones that flowed only in quiet imaginations. They never carried boats or fish, but they still deserve to exist somewhere. So they run here, in reflections and roots." She turned then to address all of them, her lantern casting a warm arc of light across their gathered forms. "This garden," she said, "is nourished by seeds of memory and of longing. Some of you ruled in places that were real and solid, with stones and laws and names written in ink. But beneath those kingdoms, inside your hearts, there were always other lands as well, the ones you wished you could have created, the gentle versions of your realms that never quite came to be. Here, if you like, you may plant those unseen places, not as regrets, but as gifts, not as sorrows, but as small, peaceful dreams." A quiet wonder settled over them. The idea moved through their thoughts like soft light. They did not have to cling to the image of what had been lost or never realized with sharp grief. Instead, they could shape those tender, unwritten desires into something living and gentle. The notion soothed them, like a slow hand smoothing out a wrinkled cloth. "How do we plant them?" asked a queen whose gown still shimmered with faint echoes of sun on sand. Her voice was soft, touched with a hopeful curiosity. The witch extended her hand, palm up. In the center of her palm lay a small packet of seeds, each one glowing faintly, as if lit from within by tiny stars. "You do not need tools," she answered. "You need only to remember, briefly, the kingdom you wished you could have made, not the one of war or law or worry, the one of comfort, the one where your people might have slept without fear, where the wind might have moved gently through their days. Hold that image, quietly, kindly, and then breathe onto a seed." She walked among them, offering one glowing seed to each guest. When the Snow Lantern Queen took hers, it lay in her palm like a tiny crystal, cool and bright. She closed her fingers around it and thought of a valley where winter and spring mingled gently, where children could skate on shallow ponds while flowers bloomed at the edges, where no one ever feared the dark months. She opened her hand, breathed softly on the seed, and watched as its light changed, taking on a faint hue of pale blue-green. Then, following the witch's nod, she knelt and placed it into a small hollow in the earth. The king of the vanished river cradled his seed like a drop of condensed moonlight. He thought of a kingdom where no one ever dammed the water or forced it into narrow channels, where rivers were treated as wise, wandering friends, not as obstacles or tools. He imagined boats moving without urgency, people listening to the water's stories instead of shouting over them. When he exhaled, the seed shimmered with a gentle, liquid glow. And when he set it into the soil near the small, reflective pool, the water's surface trembled in greeting. One by one, the others followed. A king who had once ruled a harsh, stone-walled citadel imagined a city of open courtyards and trees growing right through the roofs, and his seed glowed tender green. A queen who had spent her life among endless ceremonies and stiff formalities dreamed of a land where festivals were simple, where people wore flowers instead of heavy jewels, and her seed shimmered with warm, rosy light. Each memory, each hope, each soft wish that had never found a place in the waking world now found a resting ground in the garden's dark, welcoming soil. As the last seed was planted, the garden grew very quiet. The wind paused, the leaves stilled, and for a heartbeat, the stars seemed to hold their light in place. Then, as if in response to an invisible signal, tiny sprouts appeared where the seeds had gone in. They rose slowly, gracefully, unfurling slender stems and small leaves that glowed with the colors of their maker's dreams. The blossoms did not open fully. This was only their beginning. But even in their tender, newborn shapes, they radiated a soft, peaceful beauty, as if they were already breathing out calm into the night. The guests watched, their faces lit by lantern, starlight, and the gentle glow of the new plants. There was no triumph in their expressions, no sharp joy. There was something deeper and quieter, a sense of release, of acceptance, of seeing a part of themselves finally given form in a place where it would be safe. The snow lantern queen's eyes shone with reflections of pale blossoms. The king of the vanished river's gaze softened, as if he were listening to a new, faint stream beginning to whisper under the earth. "These kingdoms," the witch said at last, her voice as soft as the rustle of petals, "will never need to be ruled. They will never know borders or battles. They will simply grow here, gently, as long as the stars remember how to shine. When you walk in this garden, you will walk among your own unwritten dreams, and they will walk among you in scent and color and quiet light." She looked around at them, her eyes bright and tender. "You are not only what was, you are also what you wished could have been. And in this place, both may rest together, peacefully." The night settled more deeply around them, but it did not feel dark. The new plants glowed softly. The old ones answered with their own familiar light. And above, the sky blossomed with a field of calm, silver stars. The guests lingered in the garden, breathing in the gentle air, feeling the soft earth beneath their feet, letting the presence of their unwritten kingdoms cradle their spirits. Somewhere, a faint trickle of unseen water murmured through the roots, a tender song of beginnings that asked nothing and promised only quiet. When at last they turned to go back inside, they did so slowly, as one might leave a beloved sanctuary, knowing it would still be there waiting. The witch followed at the rear, pausing once to look back at the garden. The plants swayed softly in the breeze, their lights bobbing like little dreams anchored gently to the ground. She whispered a small blessing, one for growth without pain, for beauty without demand, for softness without fear. Inside the inn, the hearth glowed in welcome, and the scent of warm tea floated through the air. The kings and queens returned to the common room with lighter steps, their faces touched with a new kind of peace. They had given parts of their hearts to the earth and found that nothing had been taken away from them. Instead, something gentle had been added. The night wrapped itself around the inn like a quiet, star-sprinkled cloak, and at the crossing of ages, written and unwritten kingdoms now rested together, rooted gently in the same deep, dreaming soil. The next day unfolded with the same gentle rhythm that had begun to weave itself around the inn like a familiar song. Morning came, soft and pale, washing the walls with a mild, pearly light. The witch moved quietly through the rooms, as she always did, setting out simple breakfasts, straightening chairs, opening windows, just enough to let the fresh air sigh in. The kings and queens descended from their rooms at their own pace, no bells calling them, no schedules binding them, only the slow pull of hunger and the quiet promise of company. They spoke in low voices over bowls of warm porridge and slices of fresh bread. Sometimes they fell silent and simply listened to the sounds around them. The crackle of logs in the hearth, the distant murmur of wind in the grasses outside, the faint, steady breathing of the house itself. The snow lantern queen sat wrapped in her pale cloak, a cup of tea cradled between her hands, her gray eyes calm and thoughtful. The king of the vanished river rested with his elbow on the table, his head turned slightly toward the window, as if listening for hidden currents in the air. Others, once restless in their wandering, now seemed content to let the hours drift slowly past, like leaves floating on a silver stream. As the morning deepened into afternoon, a soft, almost playful wind began to move around the inn. It slipped through small cracks and keyholes, fluttered the edges of curtains, and brushed along the beams overhead. It was not a harsh or insistent wind. It was light, curious, as if searching for something. The witch lifted her head and felt it stir the loose strands of her hair. In that subtle movement, she recognized another call, quieter than the gardens, older than the lantern stars, but just as clear to someone who had lived long listening to such things. There was another place in the inn that wished to be opened, another gentle secret waiting to be shared. When the light outside began to soften toward evening, she stood and set aside her tasks. The hearth was well fed, the pot on the fire simmered peacefully, and cups and bowls were ready for the night. Her guests, sensing a new quiet intention around her, turned their attention toward her without needing to be asked. The witch let a small, warm smile touch her face. "You have seen the garden," she said, her voice low and even, "where your unwritten kingdoms have taken root. Tonight, if you wish, I will show you another room. It holds what is left of many days that once were, and many banners that no longer fly in any wind but this one." There was a gentle murmur through the room, not of excitement exactly, but of soft anticipation. The compulsion to know more was not sharp. It was like the feeling that comes when one is very comfortable and someone offers another blanket, unnecessary, perhaps, but welcome. The witch took a lantern from its hook, lit it with a touch of flame from the hearth, and beckoned them with a tilt of her head. Without hurry, the kings and queens rose and followed her, their forms gliding with the slow grace of drifting clouds. She led them down a narrow hallway they had not noticed before. The ceiling dipped a little lower here. The walls were closer together, and the floorboards creaked with a softer, older sound. The air grew cooler, touched with the faint, familiar sense of old wood, dust, and something else beneath them all. The faintest hint of wool, silk, and linen that had once moved in open air. At the end of the hallway was a door of dark, polished wood, plain except for a single, carved line across the middle, like a horizon under a quiet sky. The witch paused with her hand on the latch and looked back at her guests. "This room," she said, "is called the Library of Silent Banners. Nothing in it will speak aloud, but everything in it remembers." Then she lifted the latch, and the door opened without a sound, as if it had been waiting for this moment with patient courtesy. Inside, the room was long and slightly dim, lit by only a few candles and the soft glow of the lantern in the witch's hand. The ceiling arched gently overhead, and along the walls were shelves not filled with books, but with carefully folded fabrics. Some were stacked, others rolled, and a few hung from rods, their lower edges brushing just above the floor. The colors were muted, now dull gold, faded crimson, softened green, worn blue, but hints of their former brilliance still lingered like the echo of a song. The air held the quiet of a place where many stories rested together, not jostling, not competing, simply existing side by side in peaceful companionship. The witch stepped inside, and the others followed, their eyes drawn to the hanging cloths. Some pieces still bore fragments of heraldic designs, a half-visible stag leaping in pale thread, a faint outline of a mountain, a curling wave, a spray of leaves. Others were plain, the color itself once having been enough to speak of fields or seas or skies. Some were heavy, the weave thick and strong. Others were fine and light, almost translucent in places where the threads had worn thin. All of them held a softness that came from age and use, from years of moving in wind and light before being folded away into this restful shadow. "This is where many banners come," the witch said gently, lifting the lantern a little higher so that the warm light washed over the cloth-lined shelves. when there is no longer a place for them in the world of sun and weather. Some are from great halls, others from small pavilions set up for festivals long forgotten. Some covered tables at coronations, others hung above doors on ordinary days that were special to someone and no one else. When their poles have broken and their colors have faded from the eyes of living ones, the memory of them drifts here. I gather them when I can, and the inn keeps the rest. The snow lantern queen drew closer to a length of pale fabric that hung from a rod near the entrance. Its color was a soft, quiet white, like snow just touched by early dawn. A simple border of silver thread traced its edge, worn thin in places, but still visible. As she reached out, the witch nodded in silent permission. The queen's fingers, faint and translucent, brushed the cloth. At once, a sensation rose in the air around it. Not a voice, not an image, but a feeling cold air filled with the sound of quiet cheering, the sight of breath puffing from mouths as people gathered in a great snowy square, waiting for a queen to appear at a balcony and light the first winter lantern of the year. The snow lantern queen's eyes softened, recognizing the echo of her own world. The banner had not flown over her valley, but over one like it in another time. Its story, though different, lay close to her own. The king of the vanished river turned toward a folded cloth resting on a lower shelf, its surface embroidered with thread that had once been the deep blue of summer evenings. He knelt and placed his hand upon it, and a gentle hush fell over the group. In that hush, a quiet came to life. The rustle of many people sitting along a riverbank, the faint pluck of stringed instruments, the murmur of water moving under boats decorated with small lanterns. This banner had hung from a bridge's railing in a faraway town, in a kingdom whose river had not vanished, but whose name had. The king closed his eyes, letting the feeling of that distant celebration wash through him like a tender tide. All around the room, the guests wandered, slow and careful, touching fabric with hands that carried no weight, yet woke memories as surely as a breeze wakes ripples on a pond. A queen in a gown, faded violet, rested her palm on a length of deep green cloth. At once, the air around her filled with a sense of pine forests and the distant sound of horns calling people to gather not for war, but for a festival of song. A king with silver in his hair laid his fingers on a plain, warm brown runner and felt the sudden, vivid presence of a small, crowded hall where farmers had once shared a simple meal with him, their laughter rising to the rafters like birds. The witch watched them move among the banners, her lantern held low, as if she did not wish to overpower the subtle light that seemed to rise from the cloth itself. "You see," she said quietly, her voice blending with the soft rustle of fabric and the imagined sounds that drifted up. "History is heavy with dates and battles and decrees. It remembers sharp moments, loud ones, moments that left marks on stone. But these banners," she gestured around them, "remember softer things. They remember evenings and mornings, celebrations and quiet gatherings. They remember the color of a king's cloak when he laughed for the first time in many days. They remember the touch of a queen's hand as she smoothed a wrinkle before stepping out to greet her people. She stepped to a tall banner that hung in the furthest corner, its colors nearly lost to shadow. Only a faint pattern remained, like waves or rolling hills. The witch did not touch it, but stood near it with a respectful stillness. "Some of these," she went on, "come from your own kingdoms. Others come from lands you never knew. Here, they rest together. Their stories do not fight. They do not ask to be told in order. They simply breathe." Her fingers brushed the edge of a nearby cloth, and a faint sense of sun on stone and the murmur of a city square rose, then faded again like a sigh. The kings and queens moved more slowly now, their gestures reverent. In the library of silent banners, their own titles seemed to grow thinner, less important. They were no longer only kings and queens. They were part of a wide, gentle tapestry of lives that had unfolded under many skies. Some lay their ghostly cheeks briefly against the cloth, closing their eyes and letting the softness and the remembered warmth hold them. Others simply stood with their hands resting lightly on the fabric, sharing a long, peaceful silence with the invisible crowds and forgotten days each banner contained. After a while, when the candles had burned lower and the lantern's light had softened to a mellow glow, the witch spoke again. "If you wish," she said, "you may leave a trace of your own here. Not a banner, for those belong to another time, but a thread." From the pocket of her dress, she drew a small bundle of fine, shimmering strands, each one a different shade: silver like moonlight on snow, blue like deep water, gold like old sunlight, green like moss after rain. These threads are not taken from any cloth. They are spun from your stories as you tell them, from the gentle parts, the quiet parts, the parts that bring rest instead of pain. One by one, she offered a thread to each guest. The snow lantern queen's was pale and glimmering, tinged with the soft blue of winter dusk. The king of the vanished river's thread shone with a low, flowing blue-green light, like the surface of water seen at twilight. Others took threads that matched their innermost memories: a warm bronze, a tender rose, a muted violet. The witch showed them how to loop the threads through the edges of the banners, tying them in small, simple knots. The cloth accepted each new strand without protest, as if glad to be joined with living memory once more. As the last thread was tied, the room seemed to exhale a long, contented breath. The banners hung a little easier, their folds settling in a way that felt more relaxed, more complete. The kings and queens stepped back and looked around, seeing not only the remnants of the past, but their own presence woven gently into it. They were no longer only visitors. They were part of the library now, part of the quiet, enduring fabric of this place. The witch lowered her lantern, and the light fell into softer pools around their feet. "When you feel lonely," she said, her voice as calm and rhythmic as a lullaby, "remember that your stories do not float alone in the dark. They rest alongside many others, touching at the edges, sharing warmth. Here, in this room, no banner stands alone on a high, cold wall. They lean upon one another, as you may lean upon one another, even in the silence. She turned toward the door, and slowly they followed her out. As the last of them stepped over the threshold, the lantern in her hand cast one final glow back into the library of silent banners. The folded cloths and hanging fabrics shone briefly, like fields of sleeping flowers stirred by a passing breeze. Then the door closed with a soft, contented click, and the room returned to its gentle, shadowed rest. Back in the common hall, the fire welcomed them with a steady, golden flame. The air smelled of soup and herbs and the faint sweetness of something baking. The kings and queens settled once more into chairs and benches, but their faces were different now, more relaxed, more open, as if they each carried a piece of that quiet room with them. Above, the sky outside deepened into a rich, star-sprinkled blue. The banners in the hidden library hung in stillness, their silent stories softly intertwined with every breath the inn now took. And at the crossing of ages, the witch moved among her guests with an easy grace, knowing that not only their crowns, but their colors, their fabrics, their gentle days had found a home. The night drew its soft curtains around the inn, and somewhere behind the walls, the silent banners dreamed peacefully of wind, sky, and the calm, silver light of forgotten mornings. The night chose itself with the same quiet care that the inn seemed to give to everything. It came after a day of deep stillness, when even the wind had grown thoughtful and slow, drifting through the grasses in long, unbroken sighs. The sky had been clear from morning to twilight. The blue stretched thin and high, as if it had been washed clean by invisible hands. As the sun slipped away, leaving a gentle blush along the horizon, the witch felt a familiar, delicate shift inside the fabric of the world. It was like the loosening of a hidden knot, the soft opening of a door that was not made of wood or stone, but of time and moonlight. She knew, before she even looked, that the silver stream would come that night. The inn was quiet. The kings and queens had moved through the day with a sense of unspoken peace, as though some of the heaviness in their chests had dissolved into the air. They had walked in the garden, pausing to watch the tender sprouts of their unwritten kingdoms sway under the slow caress of the breeze. Some had found their way back to the library of silent banners, drawn by the softness of cloth and the muted glow of memory. Others had simply sat beneath the eaves, listening to the sky and letting their thoughts drift through the calm spaces between heartbeats. No one clamored for answers. No one reached for power. They had begun to grow used to this gentle, nameless way of being. As the first stars blinked awake in the deepening blue, the witch went to the front door and stood for a moment beneath the lantern's warm, golden light. She closed her eyes and felt the night settle against her skin. There, just beyond the edges of the inn's usual world, she sensed it, a cool, silver presence, narrow and winding, like a ribbon laid carefully upon the dark earth. It was not the king's vanished river, nor any river that had ever flowed on a map. It was a stream made of reflection and forgetting, of softened sound and melted titles. It had come, as it sometimes did, to the back of the inn, running for a few quiet hours between the trunks of night and the roots of stars. She turned away from the front and moved through the inn to the rear door, her steps unhurried, her shawl trailing in a soft, dark wave behind her. Before opening it, she paused in the main room, where the kings and queens were gathered in a calm cluster of chairs and benches, their faces lit by the steady, comforting fire. The Snow Lantern Queen looked up first, her gray eyes reflecting a faint silver she did not yet understand. The king of the vanished river followed her gaze, and something in him stilled, as if some far inside tide had paused to listen. The others grew quiet, drawn by a change too subtle to name, but too present to ignore. "The stream has come," the witch said gently, her voice as soft as the hush before rain. "It flows only on certain nights, when the moon is very quiet and the stars feel close. It does not carry water in the way you once knew it. It carries names. If you wish, I will take you to it." There was no need to persuade them. The offer itself had the weightless gravity of a dream one has waited for without knowing. They rose slowly, one after another, crowns dim, cloaks trailing, their movements like the shifting of soft clouds across a night sky. Together they followed her as she opened the back door and stepped out into the darkness. The garden greeted them first, its blossoms glowing faintly, their colors muted under the silver breath of the moon. The plants of unwritten kingdoms seemed to bow as they passed, their leaves and petals whispering in tones too delicate to be words. Beyond the last beds and the old protective tree, the land sloped gently downward. It was here, in a shallow hollow that did not exist by day, that the stream had appeared. It shone softly in the dimness, a narrow ribbon of silver light laid upon the ground, as if someone had poured liquid moon across the earth. It was not deep, hardly more than a hand's breadth, and its surface was as smooth as glass, barely rippling. Yet it moved, slowly, steadily, with a motion that was more like breathing than flowing. It wound its way behind the inn, slipping between tufts of grass and low, curious flowers, and disappeared into the shadow of a cluster of stones that seemed to be listening. Above it, the stars gathered in a more focused scatter, like gentle eyes watching their own reflection. The witch lowered her lantern, letting its golden glow join the silver of the stream. "This," she said quietly, "is the river where names grow soft. It appears only when the night is ready to hold what you are willing to lay down. It does not erase. It does not judge. It only softens. If you look into it, you will see your names, the names the world gave you. You may watch them melt. You may watch them become something lighter." The Snow Lantern Queen stepped forward, her snow-white hair catching the moonlight like frost. She knelt at the stream's edge, her cloak settling around her like a drift of silent winter. When she leaned over, the surface of the silver water trembled and then steadied, showing her reflection, her pale face, her gray eyes, the delicate circlet of frost. Then, slowly, another image unfurled beside it, not of her features, but of letters, slender and precise. They formed the name she had once carried, long and formal, weighted with lineage and responsibility. Syllables that had once echoed in great halls and across frozen squares. For a moment, seeing it so clearly, she felt the old heaviness of it, like a cloak of ice laid over her shoulders. Then the stream breathed, and the letters began to soften. The sharp edges of each line blurred. The loops and strokes loosened and ran gently into each other, like ink touched by a drop of clear water. The name did not vanish all at once. It relaxed, as though stretching after holding the same rigid shape for far too long. Some parts faded, others brightened, until what remained was not a title, not a full string of syllables, but a single, simple sound, the one that had once been whispered to her by her mother before the crown, the one used only in quiet rooms, by those who had known her as a child. That soft, intimate syllable lingered on the stream's surface, glowing like a tiny, peaceful star. The queen's face changed. Her eyes filled not with tears, but with a deep, tender calm. She reached out, and though her hand did not disturb the stream, the little glowing sound seemed to answer her, pulsing once with a gentle light, then sinking slowly downward, as if finding a resting place in the silver depths. When she sat back, her shoulders had a different shape, less burdened, more like the slope of hills under soft snow. The king of the vanished river came next. He approached the stream with a familiarity that surprised him, as though he were meeting a cousin of the river he had once known. When he leaned over, his reflection wavered into view, his dark hair, his deep, steady eyes, the faint glow of water memory around him. Beside his face, letters rose, the full, formal name he had signed on decrees and treaties, the name shouted by heralds from balconies, the name carved into stone that had long since crumbled. It seemed at first like a weight pressing down onto the water, solid and unyielding. Then, as the witch had said, the stream did its gentle work. The letters loosened, their firmness melting into curves and curls. The heavy, resonant title he had carried as a mantle dissolved into softer strokes, into shapes that reminded him of river eddies, of ripples moving around stones. What remained, after a few long, silent breaths, was a small, simple mark that was not quite a word, more of a sound, the affectionate nickname his youngest sister had once used when they played on the riverbank as children. It glowed faintly, then folded into the flowing silver, leaving behind a quiet sense of lightness in his chest. One by one, the other kings and queens came to the water. Each knelt or leaned in, and each saw the long, heavy lines of their old names, some simple and strong, others elaborate and twisting, adorned with titles and honorifics like too many jewels. And each watched as those names softened, melted, and gathered themselves into something smaller, gentler, truer. Sometimes the stream offered a single syllable. Sometimes it showed only an image, a flower, a bird, a color that represented the essence of what they had been beneath their crowns. Everything that was harsh or sharp or too heavy drifted away, like ice breaking under a warm sun, leaving only something that felt like the sound of their own heartbeat when they were very young. The witch did not kneel with them, not tonight. She had already laid her names down long ago, in nights when there had been no guests to witness it. She stood a short distance away, watching over them as one might watch over children learning how to walk in soft grass. Her lantern illuminated their faces, and the silver of the stream reflected her quiet presence behind them. A steady figure, neither queen nor witch in that moment, only a gentle guardian of a place where burdens could loosen without being lost. Are we still ourselves? A king asked at last, his voice low and thoughtful, as he watched the last curl of his long title fade into the flowing light. If our names grow soft? The witch's answer came with the calm certainty of many seasons. You are more yourselves, she said. Names are like garments. They keep us warm. They tell others something about us, but they are not the skin beneath. When your names soften, the skin can breathe. The soul can stretch. You are not less. You are simply more free. Wind moved through the grass, sending a ripple across the surface of the silver stream. For a moment, the reflections blurred into a luminous shimmer that held all their softened names together, like a handful of stars held in a single cupped palm. The kings and queens watched, breathing slowly, their forms glowing with a gentler light than before. They no longer seemed to stand apart from the night. They had become part of it, as natural as the curve of the moon or the hush of the distant hills. Some of them spoke softly to the water, thanking it, though it did not answer with words. It answered with a deep, peaceful silence, the kind of silence that welcomes sound instead of swallowing it. Others simply stood and listened, feeling the shift inside themselves, the quiet rearranging of what mattered. They were no longer only rulers of places that had vanished, bearers of histories that no longer fit inside the world. They were wanderers, yes, but also simply souls, gentle and tired and deserving of rest. At length, when the moon had climbed higher and the night had grown heavier with stars, the stream began to fade. Its silver light thinned, its breathing slowed, and the ribbon of liquid moonlight sank into the earth, leaving behind only a faint dampness in the grass and a lingering coolness in the air. The kings and queens watched it go without fear. They understood that it had not taken anything from them. It had only softened what was ready to soften. Their names still existed, somewhere deep and quiet, but they no longer pressed painfully against the edges of their beings. Instead, they floated, light as petals, in the gentle flow of who they now were. The witch led them back through the garden, where their unwritten kingdoms glowed among the leaves. The plants seemed to nod as they passed, as if recognizing the change in the ones who had planted them. Inside the inn, the hearth burned steadily, its golden warmth waiting like an old friend. The guests returned to their places with slower, more relaxed steps. When they sat, Their cloaks unfolded around them, not like armor, but like soft blankets. No one spoke for a while. There was no need. The quiet in the room was not empty. It was full of the subtle sound of many hearts beating more gently. At last, the Snow Lantern Queen lifted her eyes to the witch and offered a small, serene smile. "Tonight," she said, her voice as soft as falling snow, "I feel less like a queen and more like a person who once loved a valley of winter lights. It is a kind feeling." The king of the vanished river nodded. "And I," he added, "feel less like a vanished river and more like a man who once listened to water and still can, even here." The witch inclined her head, her eyes warm and deep. "That is all you ever needed to be," she answered. "Here in this inn, between the ages, you are allowed to be only that." The fire sighed in agreement. The wind brushed gently against the windows. Outside, where the stream had been, the grass glimmered faintly with residual silver, like dew kissed by stars. Night folded itself around the inn in a soft, dark embrace. In their rooms, the kings and queens lay down not as rulers, not as legends, but as simple, quiet souls, their softened names resting peacefully within them like small, warm lights. And at the crossing of ages, the witch sat for a little while longer by the hearth, listening to the hush of the world, feeling a calm certainty that something deep had loosened. They were closer now, she knew, to the moment when crowns could be set aside not with sorrow, but with gratitude, and when a final, gentle feast would gather them all in one last circle of warm light. The days that followed the night of the silver stream unfolded with an increasing softness, as though the air itself had learned to walk more quietly through the rooms of the inn. The kings and queens, who had once carried their titles like iron and stone, now moved with a new lightness, their gestures unhurried, their faces calm. They no longer spoke much of the lands they had ruled, nor of the burdens that had once bent their shoulders. Instead, their conversations drifted towards small, gentle things. A tree they had loved as children, the color of a particular sunrise, the feel of rain on their hands after a dry season. The inn listened, pleased, as if it had been waiting for their stories to turn inward and soften in this way. The witch watched these changes with a quiet tenderness. She saw how the Snow Lantern Queen stood by the window in the late afternoons, simply watching the clouds move and letting her breath follow their slow, shifting shapes. She noticed how the king of the vanished river would sit on the back step, eyes half closed, listening not for the roar or rush of any great current, but for the faint trickle of the little hidden water that wound through the garden's roots. Others found their own small rituals. A queen who liked to sit beneath the old tree and stroke its bark as if it were an old friend. A king who gathered fallen petals from the unwritten kingdoms and lined them up in quiet patterns on the table before gently letting them scatter again. One evening, when the sky was clear and the moon had swollen into a bright silver coin, the witch felt a new stillness settle over the inn. It was not the silence of emptiness, but the hush that comes when something is ripening. when a fruit has reached its sweet, full moment and is ready to fall into waiting hands. She sat by the hearth for a while, listening to the fire breathe and to the faint sounds of her guests moving through the house above. Outside, the stars hung in a wide, peaceful scatter, and the wind moved in slow, thoughtful strokes across the grass. Within her, an old certainty rose. It was time for the last feast. She stood and moved to the kitchen with the patient grace of someone who had been preparing for this night for a very long time. There was no rush in her movements, only a steady, gentle care. She lit more candles than usual, their flames adding soft gold to the corners of the room. Then she began to cook, choosing ingredients with a kind of quiet love. She simmered a thick, fragrant soup with root vegetables and grains, letting it become rich and velvety over a slow fire. She baked loaves of bread with crisp, warm crusts and soft, tender crumbs. She sliced fruits that tasted of late summer and early autumn, their juices sweet and mild. She brewed tea with herbs meant to calm not only the body, but the delicate places inside the heart where old regrets sometimes stirred. As she worked, the scents rose and mingled with the evening air. Earth and grain, sweetness and warmth, the faint spice of something that tasted a little like courage and a little like rest. The inn filled with these fragrances until even the floorboards seemed to relax. The fire in the hearth burned bright but not fierce, its light flowing across the walls like liquid amber. The witch set a long wooden table in the center of the common room, placing bowls and cups and plates with simple, precise care. At each place, she laid not only a setting, but a folded cloth, soft and clean, a small gesture of welcome that felt almost like an embrace. When everything was ready, she stepped to the foot of the stairs and spoke not loudly, but in a voice that carried smooth and low through every beam and doorway. "Come down," she called gently, "if you wish. The night is ready for a feast." There was a brief pause, like the held breath before a wave reaches the shore. Then, from above, footsteps began to drift downward, soft, unhurried, some barely more than a whisper on the stairs. The Snow Lantern Queen came first, her white hair shimmering faintly in the candlelight, followed by the King of the Vanished River, whose presence brought with it a cool, fresh calm. Behind them, more forms appeared. Kings and queens from many forgotten lands, their crowns dimmed, their cloaks softened by the months or centuries they had spent wandering. They gathered around the long table, their faces lit by the steady glow of candle and fire, and for a moment no one spoke. They simply stood and looked at the feast, the simple, abundant food, the neat rows of bowls, the folded cloths, and then at one another. In their eyes, there was a shared understanding, gentle and quiet. This was not just another supper. This was a circle being completed, a closing of a long, wandering path. Before they sat, the witch nodded toward the table's center, where, until now, the wood lay bare. "Tonight," she said softly, "this table is not only for food, it is a resting place. If you wish, you may place your crowns upon it before we eat. not to lose them, not to throw them away, only to let them rest with you one last time as guests instead of burdens. Her eyes moved from face to face, never demanding, only offering. There was a hush that followed, but it was not uncertain or afraid. It was the quiet of deep choice, of hearts turning gently towards something they had already decided. The snow lantern queen lifted her hands to her head, and the delicate circlet of frost that had hovered there since her arrival shimmered more brightly for a moment. Then, with slow, deliberate care, she removed it. In her hands, it looked smaller, more fragile, like a ring of ice-kissed leaves. She stepped forward and placed it on the table in front of her seat, the frost sparkling faintly in the candlelight. When she straightened, her head looked lighter, her posture more natural, as if her neck had been released from a weight it had long forgotten it carried. The king of the vanished river followed. The shimmering band of water light that had encircled his brow drifted down into his hands like a loop of moonlit tide. He gazed at it for a long moment, and in that gaze was not sadness, but a kind of tender gratitude for rivers and boats, for lanterns and songs, for all that had been. Then he laid it on the table, beside the queen's frosted circlet. The band settled into stillness, its surface catching and reflecting the candlelight in gentle waves. One by one, the others did the same. Some crowns were solid metal, dulled by time. Others were woven from leaves or flowers that glowed faintly with magic, unfaded by the years. A few were almost invisible, made of nothing but light and memory. Each was lifted carefully, held for a breath like a living thing, then placed gently upon the wood. Soon, the center of the table held a small constellation of crowns, circles of all shapes and materials, lying side by side without hierarchy, without competition, simply resting together in a quiet, shared peace. When the last crown had been set down, the witch exhaled softly, as if some inner knot within the inn had loosened. "Sit," she said, and her voice was warm and steady. "Tonight you are not kings and queens answering to duty. Tonight you are guests, answering only to hunger and to the company of one another." They took their places at the table, the flickering candlelight painting gentle patterns on their faces. The crowns lay between them like a calm, gleaming river of the lives they had led. The witch ladled soup into their bowls, moving from place to place with unhurried care. The fragrance rose, thick and soothing, and they lifted their spoons with the same reverence they had once given to ceremonial cups and chalices. But there was nothing ceremonial about this meal. The first tastes brought warmth that sank deep, filling spaces that had been hollow for a very long time. Bread was passed from hand to hand. Fruit was shared in quiet appreciation, its sweetness a reminder of orchards and gardens and markets long gone, yet somehow present in this simple act of eating together. As they ate, the witch spoke, her tone as gentle as the firelight. "If you would like," she said, "this can be a feast of small things, not of victories, not of laws, not of the great deeds that turned history's wheel. those have already had their share of words. Tonight, tell us about the quiet acts that no one wrote down, the kindnesses, the mornings, the evenings, the moments when you were most simply yourselves. Her eyes shone softly, inviting but never pressing. There was a pause. Then the snow lantern queen set her spoon down and folded her ghost pale hands around her bowl. Once, she began, her voice slow and even. During a winter that would not end, a child in my valley fell ill. The road to her house was buried in snow. No one could reach her. So I walked. I left the palace before dawn, wrapped in 3 cloaks, and I walked the long hill through drifts that came up to my hips. I carried with me a jar of broth and a lantern. When I reached her home, her mother wept because she thought I had come to bring news of death. Instead, I sat by the child's bed and fed her broth, spoon by spoon, until she smiled. No one wrote about that day, but I think of it often. Her eyes glowed with a quiet, steady light, not of pride, but of a deep, simple satisfaction. The king of the vanished river spoke next, his gaze resting on his hands as they cradled the warm bowl. "I remember," he said, "an old fisherman who lost his boat in a storm. It was all he had. There was no law I could pass to mend that loss. So, one night, I walked alone to the river and waited until he came, as he always did, to stand on the bank and listen to the water. I told him he could have one of my palace boats, the smallest one. He refused. He said a king's boat was not fit for river nets, so I sat down beside him, and we simply listened to the river together until dawn. In the morning, some of my guards, without orders, built him a new boat from wood left over in the palace yard. He always said it was the river that had given it to him." A faint smile touched his lips. He was right, I think. Around the table, the stories continued, moving from one guest to another like a gentle flame passed from candle to candle. A queen spoke of how she used to sneak bread from the palace kitchens to leave on the windowsills of her poorest subjects, knowing they would never know who had placed it there. A king told of planting a single tree in a courtyard of stone, knowing he might not live to see it full grown, but trusting that someone would one day rest in its shade. Another queen remembered quietly how, once, when she was very young, she had loosened the rigid rules of a ceremony so that a frightened child could laugh instead of tremble. None of these stories were recorded in chronicles. They were not part of the reasons armies marched or treaties were signed. They were small, almost weightless in the eyes of the world. Yet, as they were spoken, the room filled with a softness that was deeper than any triumph. The crowns on the table seemed to glow faintly in response, as if acknowledging that these were the moments that had truly deserved them all along. The witch listened, her heart full and very still. This was the feast she had always wished to offer them, a table where they could lay down not just their crowns, but their need to be great, a place where they could touch, perhaps for the first time in a long time, the gentle truth that they had never been only rulers. They had been hands that gave, feet that walked long roads, eyes that watched over sleeping villages, hearts that had made quiet, tender choices. When the last bowl was nearly empty and the final piece of bread had been shared, silence settled again. But this silence was soft and luminous, like the air after a gentle rain. The candles burned low, their flames steady and untroubled. The fire murmured in the hearth. Outside, the moon drifted higher, laying a silver path across the roof of the inn and the garden beyond. The witch rose and looked at the crowns, resting in their small constellation of metal, frost, light, and leaf. "Thank you," she said to them, and to the ones who had worn them, for the small stories, for the gentle ones. They will stay here, in the wood and in the air, even when you have gone. Her words were not farewell, not yet. They were a blessing, a soft hand laid upon the closing pages of a long, long book. The kings and queens looked at one another, and in their faces there was a shared understanding that required no voice. They felt full in a way that had nothing to do with food. They felt ready in a way that was not about duty. The inn, sensing this, drew its warmth more closely around them. Somewhere outside, the unseen water beneath the garden roots whispered a low, soothing song. Above, the stars shone with a deep, quiet patience. Soon, the time would come for them to stand and walk toward a doorway that did not lead to another hall of power, but to fields of rest and sky. But for this moment, they stayed where they were, gathered around the last feast of gentle crowns, breathing together in a peaceful hush. And at the crossing of ages, the witch stood with them, a calm presence in the candlelight, keeping watch over a table where history had finally softened into something tender, simple, and profoundly kind. The last feast lingered in the air long after the bowls had been emptied and the candles had burned low. The room was full of a deep, peaceful warmth, like the hush that falls over a landscape after a gentle snowfall, or like the calm that settles on a river just before dawn. The crowns lay still upon the table, a quiet constellation of circles and glimmers, each one holding a long, soft history that no longer pressed so sternly upon any brow. The kings and queens sat with their hands resting loosely before them, their faces touched by firelight and shadow, their eyes distant and calm, as if they were watching a horizon that no one else could see. The witch stood for a time at the head of the table, listening to the silence as one might listen to a familiar lullaby, played very softly. She felt the inn itself breathing around them in slow, steady rhythms. The intake of warmth from the hearth, the gentle exhale of cool night air from the windows, the faint rustle of beams and floorboards relaxing beneath the weight of a long, long story, nearly finished. Outside, the sky had deepened into a rich, velvety dark, scattered with stars that shimmered like drops of silver dew on an invisible field. The moon hung high and quiet, a patient, watchful lantern hung at the edge of the world. She knew, as clearly as she knew how to stir a pot or light a lantern, that the hour had come. Moving with her usual unhurried grace, she walked along the table, touching the back of each chair lightly as she passed. Her fingers did not disturb any cloth or any crown. They only offered a soft acknowledgement, a wordless thank you. When she reached the door that opened to the front of the inn, she paused and placed her hand on the latch. The ordinary lantern outside still glowed with warm, golden light, casting familiar patterns across the threshold. But tonight, there was another light as well, one that did not come from oil or flame. It seeped in under the crack like a soft silver mist, cool and gentle, carrying with it the scent of distant stars and fields of unseen flowers. She opened the door, and the world beyond did not look as it had on other nights. The small road, the low hills, the grasses that whispered under moonlight, these had faded into something softer, thinner, as if they had stepped a little to the side to make room. In their place, stretching out from the threshold like a wide, shimmering path, lay a field of stars. They were not high above in the sky, but level with the door, spread out like a quiet, glowing meadow, each point of light resting on a dark, velvety ground that did not quite look like earth. The stars were not harsh or blinding. They were soft and silver, pulsing faintly as if they shared the same slow heartbeat. A gentle breeze moved over them, making the light ripple like reflections on a calm lake. The kings and queens rose from the table without being asked. There was no command, no summons, only a shared understanding that this path of stars had come for them. They moved toward the open door, their forms glowing faintly in answer to the silver light outside. Without their crowns, they looked less like rulers and more like travelers who had finally reached the last, quiet inn at the end of a very long road. The Snow Lantern Queen gathered her pale cloak around her, the frost in her hair catching the soft gleam of the star field. The King of the Vanished River stepped forward with the easy steadiness of someone approaching familiar water, though this water was made of light and dream. The witch stood at the threshold, as she always did when guests arrived or departed. But tonight, her role was not to invite them in from the cold. It was to send them gently onward into a kind of warmth that did not belong to any hearth. One by one, they came to stand before her. She looked into each face, seeing not the titles they had once held, nor the histories that had clung to them, but the simple, quiet souls beneath snow watchers, river listeners, tree planters, bread givers, singers of small songs. For each, she found a blessing waiting on her tongue, as if it had been growing there in secret for a very long time. To the Snow Lantern Queen, she said, "May your winter always be gentle. May your nights be full of soft lights and slow, silver snow. And may every valley you dream of be a place where no one fears the dark. Sleep now as if under a sky painted with lanterns, and let your heart be as calm as a field after snowfall." The queen smiled, and in her gray eyes there was a quiet gratitude, like the glow of candles seen through frosted glass. She stepped past the witch onto the starlit path, and the lights seemed to rise to meet her, cradling her steps in soft, silver radiance. To the King of the Vanished River, the witch said, "May you always hear gentle water in your dreams. May your nights be filled with slow, peaceful currents, and may every lantern you ever released upon your river find its way back to you as a soft, silver star. Sleep now as if in a boat that never tips, drifting on a calm, endless tide. The king bowed his head, not with ceremony, but with a simple, heartfelt thanks. He joined the queen upon the path, and the stars under his feet shimmered like reflections in a deep, quiet pool. To a queen whose kingdom had once been a place of bright festivals and loud music, the witch gave a softer wish. May your dreams be full of small gatherings, gentle songs, and the tender sound of laughter that never strains the heart. May every step you take be accompanied by a music that asks nothing of you but to listen. To a king who had always stood on high stone walls, watching over distant fields, she said, "May you rest now in low meadows of soft grass. May the wind that once brought you news of war now bring you only the scent of rain and flowers. May your eyes close on horizons that no longer demand your vigilance." She moved from one to another, her words flowing like a quiet stream, each blessing shaped to the soul before her. There were no grand promises, no thunderous declarations, only wishes woven from gentle things. Moonlight on leaves, starlight on water, the softness of moss, the curve of a sleeping child's hand, the hush of forests at dusk. And with each blessing, something in the guests seemed to loosen just a little more, like knots in a rope unwinding under warm fingers. They stepped through the door, not in a rush, but with calm certainty, their forms blending slowly with the silver glow until they were no longer separate from the field of stars, but part of its quiet, dreaming tapestry. At last, the room behind the witch grew still and empty. The table, with its crowns resting in their own soft light, stood like a small altar to everything that had been gently laid down. The fire in the hearth burned low but steady, its embers pulsing with a quiet reddish glow. The witch turned once more to the doorway and looked out. The field of stars stretched on, peaceful and quiet, trembling slightly under some unseen breeze. In the distance, the shapes of her guests were dissolving into the horizon of light, not vanishing, but becoming something softer, something that did not need edges or names. She lifted her hand and laid her palm flat against the doorframe, as if feeling the pulse of the worlds passing through. "Go in peace," she whispered, though they were too far now to hear with any kind of ear. "Let every step be a dream, and every dream be a gentle sky. May you rest without weight. May you sleep without fear. May you be held by the soft, silver quiet you always deserved." The stars seemed to shimmer in answer, tilting their light in a way that felt like a nod. Then, very slowly, she closed the door. The inn was truly still now. No footsteps creaked on the floors above. No shadows moved in the corners, except those cast by the small, steady flame in the hearth. The witch stood in the center of the room and let the silence surround her. It was not loneliness. It was a clear, spacious quiet, like the surface of a lake at dawn, before the first bird has broken it with a wing. She moved to the table and looked at the crowns one last time. They lay together peacefully, no longer symbols of power, but of journeys completed and burdens gently released. With careful, reverent hands, she gathered them and placed them in a simple wooden chest that had been waiting beneath the window. She did not lock it. She simply closed the lid and rested her palm on the wood. "Rest," she murmured to the crowns, as she once had to her own, buried beneath the roots of the old tree. "You have shown enough. Now you may be quiet." The chest accepted them with the same calmness the earth offers to fallen leaves. She returned to her chair by the fire and sat, drawing her shawl around her shoulders. The flames moved in slow, lazy patterns, casting a warm glow across the floor. Outside, the wind brushed gently against the walls, and somewhere in the unseen dark, a tiny stream in the garden roots whispered its never-ending song. The witch closed her eyes for a moment and let her breath settle into an easy rhythm, in and out, like the tides, like the turning of the seasons, like all the soft, patient things she had watched for so many years. Then, in the quiet of the empty inn, she spoke again, this time not to crowns, nor to kings and queens, but to others who might be wandering in their own long nights. "If you feel forgotten," she said softly, her words floating up into the beams and drifting out through the cracks, "know that there is always, somewhere, a small inn at the edge of time where someone would listen to your story by a gentle fire. If your name feels heavy, may it grow soft. If your heart feels tired, may it be wrapped in quiet. May moonlight be kind to your windows, and starlight gentle on your dreams." Her voice seemed to travel farther than the walls, farther than the crossroads of ages, slipping into the vast, silver-dark sky like a small, steady lantern released over a calm river. "And you who are listening now," she added, her tone even softer, as if speaking directly into a single, waiting ear, "may your night be peaceful. May your thoughts slow and grow quiet, like snowflakes falling on still water. May your breathing deepen, gentle and soft, like waves on a silver shore. May your dreams be filled with kind things, soft stars, quiet rivers, warm rooms, and someone who listens when you speak." The fire sighed and settled a little lower, its light becoming more subdued, more tender. Shadows lengthened slowly along the floor, stretching like contented cats in a patch of warmth. The witch leaned her head back against the chair and let her eyes close, the lines of her face smoothing into a tranquil rest. Outside, the stars kept their silent watch. The wind moved in calm, steady strokes. Flowers in the night garden folded their petals, and the plants of unwritten kingdoms shimmered faintly in their sleep. At the crossing of ages, the inn rested, cradled in moonlight and the silver hush of distant worlds, ready for whoever might one day need its gentle door. And somewhere, as you curl more deeply into your own pillow, your own soft darkness, her final blessing reaches you like a quiet hand, smoothing your hair. May you sleep now, peaceful and safe. May your dreams be deep and kind. May a soft, silver quiet wrap around you and hold you gently all through the night.